One of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, Jeffrey, was to get your take on this unprecedented level of control of the economy. I'm a fan of the free market, and I know you are as well. And from the early days of capitalism, we seem to have an ever increasing amount of mixed economy. And suddenly, from March of this year, we seem to be in a controlled economy as if overnight. I just wanted to sort of batch you that thought to sort of kick us off, because as you said, there's quite a lot to talk about around this issue. What are your thoughts?
There was a ticking time bomb since 2006. These plans have been in place since 2007, not just in the U.S., but really all around the world. And it came about because of an intellectual error. A bunch of computer scientists took over virology and immunology and hatched a kind of fantasy computer game model that they wanted to deploy. They wanted to deploy it in 2009, but people were distracted. So they're looking for just the right time, a new virus and a slow news day. and those things happened all at once. And yeah, by early March, the people who we're talking about like 12 people, honestly, not that many, but they became the leaders and rulers of the epidemiology establishment, or not. That's not quite the right word, of the virus control establishment. And they were bored for about 14 years because their heyday was in 2006, 2007. That's when they had their real victories. And they wanted to make good on their social experiment. And these guys are living in a bubble, and they hatched a ghastly plan. They didn't think it was ghastly. They thought it was just a bold scientific experiment driven by the data they were going to implement. But they hadn't really consulted economists or psychologists or sociologists, or much less you and me.
Doctors, perhaps?
Doctors would have been nice. The doctors, of course, have been mostly big dissidents and stuff. Anyway, they created a little bubble for themselves back in the day, and they've just been sitting, waiting for the time to do it. And we didn't know about this. I mean, I kind of did, only because I wrote about it at the time. And I knew that the plans were there. I didn't actually believe that they would go all in with them. But, that right element of media panic, uncertainty over the virus and what it would mean, the absence of serious dissent from anybody, and mass confusion.
Who is this group of people? Where are they coming from? Who they've infiltrated the virology, immunology, disease protection. Yeah. Are they coming from the World Health Organization?
No. It comes from the computer modeling.
Okay.
Computer side. So basically the gaming community. So, I mean, people who made Pac-Man, 20 years later, we're remaking the world economy. So what happened was, I don't know if you want to go back in time, but maybe we can get to that. But let's just kind of work backwards a little bit, and you let me know when you want to stop, or keep asking me questions, and I'll keep backing up and explaining this. But so by the 21st century, we had all kinds of new modeling techniques, and we had PowerPoint graphs and the ability to run stats programs that everybody could do it. You plug in your assumptions, this, press enter, out it comes. There's a 3D presentation. Click this button, you can make a graph. Click this button, you can make it 3D. Maybe there's a bar chart. You can do whatever you want. It all looks very beautiful, and you can actually trick yourself at some point into thinking this is reality. And with the advent of computer gaming, where World of Warcraft really is people's reality, the blending in the mind begins to take place. Confusing the real world with the games. Yeah. So in 2006. George Bush, government plays a very big role here, by the way, because people, private actors and intellectuals and physicists and gamers have their fantasies, but they don't have to become reality. It requires governments to do that. So George Bush in 2006 began to get very concerned that his actions in Iraq had unleashed a kind of unprecedented hell that could result in bioterrorism. And so somebody put into his hands a book on the 1918 pandemic, Spanish flu pandemic, and he read, the introduction or something. People say he read the book. I don't believe that. And it was a bad pandemic and very badly orchestrated. We can talk about that. But so he assembled a group of experts. Well, what happened was he said, look, I need to know what to do in the case of bioterrorism, like where a new virus comes to the United States. What should we do about it? I want a report from the Veterans Administration, from the State Department, from the CDC, and several other organizations, and my own cabinet. And I want us to have a plan for how to do with this. So time goes by. Well, one of the plans was this guy named Robert Glass, who's now 73 years old, still alive, but strangely silent, I must say, completely silent throughout this whole process. And he was working for Sandia Laboratories in Albuquerque, Mexico, and he's a trained physicist and a modeler. That's all he does. He just models things, and you can model anything. If you're a fisherman, you can model how many fish you're going to catch. If there's an unusual bumper crop of tuna that year or whatever, you can model whatever you want. And so his specialty he was tagged by the national laboratories to come up with a report on virus control. And he was hanging around his 14-year-old daughter, who was precocious. And she was doing a science fair project that was based on I would call it like a cooties model of viruses. Like, let's say a virus is like the cooties. So we have I don't know if you use that term, but it's like a fake. It's a fake bug that kids think that they have so that they can stay away from each other. Okay. Girls have to stay away from guys. Guys have to stay away from girls because they have cooties and they're going to infect you. It's a childish game. And so she was 14 at the time. So she came up with a model by which the kids could socially distance from each other and not give each other viruses. And so he's over the dining room table. She's working on her science fair project because she's like a sophomore in college. And he has this eureka moment. Oh, that's how you control a virus, is by keeping people away from each other. So he produced this big report, very beautiful. And he got a convert by the name of Carter Meacher, who was a failed doctor from Chicago who was working for the Veterans Administration. And he and Meacher worked together to produce this beautiful report. And everybody was impressed because everybody's impressed by fancy data science these days, and not medicine, but data science. Anyway, what happened was George Bush invited all these people to the White House to give their presentations. So the doctors show up, including the great Donald Henderson, who was the guy responsible for eradicating smallpox. And the doctor give a report. This goes something like this. When a new virus comes along, one doesn't always know what the effect's going to be. Who are the populations that are most vulnerable, who should get it and develop immunities, whether and to what extent we can create a vaccine, how the natural immunities are going to take place, much less the death rate or the fatality rate in light of those vulnerable populations. So most important thing is for us to sit tight, function normally as a society, take care, investigate with science and calmness as much as possible, and allow the medical professionals to deal with the disease. Okay, that's their beautiful presentation. George Bush is out of his mind bored. He's like, that's the most boring report I've heard in my entire life. So then the computer scientists come up and go, all right, here's what we know. A virus is deadly. It's terrible, and it's coming after us right now. And here's what it does. And the model shows virus wiping out population. So he's like, George Bush is the guy, yeah, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. What should we do? Well, here's what we do. If we keep everybody socially distant, then we can reduce it, by 20%. If we close the schools, that's another 20%. If we close the shopping centers, another 20%. And if we lock all the way down and everybody goes and lives in a refrigerator box for 3 months, then we'll have like almost no deaths. So then we can beat the enemy that way. That's when all this new language came about. So these guys didn't just invent a computer program; they invented a complete new lexicon: social distancing, targeted layered containment, and so on. Non-pharmaceutical interventions. So they have now flattening the curve. That's where that came from too. Yeah. It's a gaming slogan. So they gave this very impressive presentation with PowerPoints and colors and exploding numbers all over the place, and they seemed much more scientific than the doctors. So when it really came down to it, George Bush said, okay, I like these guys, and I like what they're saying. I like what they're doing. So he ordered the CDC to implement their programs. Now, the CDC didn't go all in with the complete totalitarian program, but it was pretty bad. It's the 2007 document from the CDC, which became official policy in the U.S., was pretty bad. It wasn't as bad as what we've lived through, and it wasn't as bad as Robert Glass and Sarah Glass's paper.
So this whole policy has sort of come out of the box, hasn't it? It's one that's sort of been prepared earlier, and here it all is conveniently ready.
Mm-hmm. This is not a conspiracy theory, by the way. I'm not alleging some big plot by anybody, by China, Rockefeller, Bill Gates, or whatever. This is an intellectual failure. It was some very compelling guys dealing with some very fashionable methodologies that had nothing to do with human reality. They were completely untested. And it was deployed because it became de facto law of the land in 2007 that we would eventually use this. And they were just looking for the right time to do it. That is literally what happened to us. That's what happened to us.
I don't think it's conspiracy theorist to acknowledge a factual part of the context in which we live, that there are globalists out there that call for greater governance. These aren't really, they're not secrets, are they? So I think it's an important part of the context that lockdown does happen to suit those who want more government and less freedom.
This is really an important consideration because all of the serious professionals on this subject throughout the 20th century, after the 1918 pandemic, said this again and again. You do not want public hysteria about viruses. You do not want the media flipping out and warning people of the coming dangers, because the frenzy will tend to diminish our capacity to respond in a medically intelligent way to viruses.
Absolutely.
Because governments are always too quick to use coercion. The public is all too quick to panic, and we have to have an intelligent response, or else we will go back to a medieval style panic where we just want to stay away. And we think that the right way to deal with the virus is to run and hide. That is not the right way to deal with the virus. So we can never go this way again. Okay.
Sorry to interject, Jeffrey, but this really means sort of the egg is broken, isn't it? The vase has smashed, and you can't go back to. You can't suddenly get whole populations to unlearn the fact that they're now terrified of each other and of these alleged viruses and so forth. That's an unreversible one, isn't it? That is a game changer.
Maybe. I really have great respect and appreciation for what happened after the Second World War with that generation of really average everyday parents who became very sophisticated about viruses. And the reason they did was all throughout the 1930s, medical professionals were trying to educate people. The way to fight a virus is through developing immunities, and by staying calm and to caring for the sick and trying to reduce the damage that they can do in a population. This was the prevailing wisdom. And so when the polio epidemic of 1949 to 1952 came along, really it started earlier, and the Polio Foundation, which is, I forget what the original name of it was, eventually became the March of Dimes. Roosevelt himself was a victim of polio and really wanted to help this foundation, but the foundation said, no, the last thing we need is politics involved in disease. Please do not endorse us. We don't want anything to do with politics. We need to treat polio as
exactly where we are now, though, isn't it?
Yeah, we need to treat polio as a disease to cure, not politicize it. And they were very emphatic about this. They forbid the White House from endorsing them because they did not want anybody to think a disease has anything to do with politics. So parents of that age became very sophisticated. I don't know if it was coming back after World War II or there was a lot of public knowledge. Like my parents understood viruses very well, and there was a cultural, social protocol associated with being sick. So you normally think that getting sick is a very bad thing, and it is a bad thing. But that generation decided to treat sickness as a kind of opportunity. So if you get sick, then they would say, okay, hey, it's okay. You can stay home from school. We're going to fuss over you and give you some soup, and you can eat ice cream if you want, and you can watch all the TV you want. And here's your Vicks Vapor Rub and a humidifier to keep you flowing. And you're going to get through this. And the good thing about that is that in a couple of days, your body is going to develop strength that it didn't know it had. And then, more than likely, you'll develop immunities to this thing you have. And that's why they treated viruses. Now, it's true they didn't treat bacteria that way, because we thought we had the magic thing called antibiotics. More recently, we've discovered that basically the same thing is true for bacteria also, that it's much better to develop natural immunities. Anyway, there was a whole generation or two or three or even more that had a great deal of sophistication about how to deal with viruses. The problem is that we kind of lost that knowledge. We didn't know we were losing it, but it was lost somewhere between, I don't know, I'm just going to say 1970 over the course of 50 years and 2020. And because people weren't well educated about viruses and immunology in general, we defaulted back to a medieval thing. And people always feel like they should have to run and hide and lock down. And that's what they've been doing since the ancient world. That's typical.
Sure. I mean, I think that there has been a big cavernous lack of education, hasn't there, really? Even miseducation. We have a very dumbed down populace, I think, at the moment, certainly here in the UK. I mean, it's interesting just to pick up what you're saying there on modelling, because as you rightly pointed out, you put in your parameters or your assumptions, and we've seen with all the climate models the disasters of their predictions not matching the facts of reality, and I find it quite frightening to think that these false assumptions, many false assumptions, we could list a lot more, the PCR test, and there are questions over the theory of infectious disease, whether or not a virus has been properly identified, all these sorts of things. But that there appears to be very, very little evidence on which to base a lockdown, whichever way you look at it, because here in the UK we were told that the reason for locking down this great big social experiment was about flattening the curve. It was about not overloading our healthcare system, and that was all they said to start off with. We're not ready for this, and the NHS are going to be inundated, and that's the reason for lockdown is to the idea being that it prevents the rapid spread of disease. But it seems to have morphed now into a general strategy for the prevention of the spread of disease, and you do hear this point from people that know a lot more about it than I do, that whatever you believe about viruses is you can't actually stop them from spreading. So slowing them down, okay, we've all got our healthcare systems ready, and in fact a lot of hospitals are empty, which is a bit of a mystery. But lockdown isn't justified in the long term, is it? I mean, it seems so much a political tool that's being used upon us.
So I'm developing an extremely cynical view about this, by the way, because this idea of flattening the curve to preserve hospital capacity is based on an unstated assumption that our medical systems are utterly incapable of scaling. Now, we don't naturally think that this is true of any other industry, right? So if in the UK everybody desperately wanted beer for some reason, and they quadrupled their consumption of beer, breweries would go, this is good news. We're all in for this. But the presumption was that hospital systems, and therefore hospital administrators and everything, couldn't figure out for the life of them what to do if they had more patients. We're sunk. What are we going to do? There's all these people outside. Anybody have an idea what to do around here? Anybody got it? Can we nap? Don't know. So we have to flatten the curve. So here's what makes me suspicious about this flattening the curve thing. The flatten the curve analytics are baked in already into the 2007 Center for Disease Control model. So already in 2007, they're presuming the utter unscalability of the healthcare system. Like, there's no way we could ever add an extra bed. You can't possibly put up a tent out back. How could you possibly prepare for an increase of demand? So my suspicion, and this is, maybe you could call this a little bit conspiracy, I think that the flatten the curve thing, because you're right that no competent person believes that you can make a virus go away just by slowing its spread. It doesn't do that. Was that the preserve hospital capacity thing was a marketing device to ultimately flatten the curve. In order to implement the policies of social distancing and school closures and cancellations of large events. So that it was never intended really to preserve hospital capacity. That was just a way that you convince the public for the first month of lockdown that it was a wise thing to do and that you're saving lives by staying home. So it was a very clever marketing trick. Yeah, it's utter bullshit. But but you have to remember that the people who mapped out this new draconian social experiment had a long time to think about how you could convince the public to do something that they would instinctively never do, which is to stay away from people, stop shaking hands, stop going to bars.
It's not a new idea, though, is it? It's not a new idea to use a pandemic for this, whether it's conspiratorial or not. People have been speaking about this, forewarning that it's possible for decades. It's not exactly a brand new idea. And what intrigues me about it is just how perfect it is for removing freedoms, for applying the economic handbrake, for the strong arm of the state to suddenly wrench unprecedented degree of control. It's all really rather frightening.
It's true. I don't know if you know the English academic economist named Friedrich Hayek, yeah. but Hayek in one of his essays in New Studies in Political Economy, he was not an anarchist, right? And I love Hayek, but he was always kind of like weak, right, when he needed to be strong. And there's a passage in there. He says, of course, we can't get rid of the state. Ultimately, we need it for a lot of things, income security, blah blah blah, and also virus control.
Really? Oops, yeah. What a giveaway.
So, yeah, you're right that even some of the best liberal thinkers have in the past conceded that we need the state for virus. So I think this is completely wrong. I think it's like if viruses are bad, the state is worse.
But where's this going economically? Because, we although a lot of people out there either won't realise this or will deny it, due to relentless propaganda, we need capitalism. We need a spark of innovation. We need some semblance of a free market to generate the stuff and to sort of keep the engine of society going. So how do you see? And I know this is your come from, obviously respecting the free markets and so forth. So how do you see this playing out? Because this sudden wrenching of control, when's that going to stop? When you bear in mind the context of the WHO and Bill Gates and others saying, well, we can't unlock until we've got a vaccine and all this sort of stuff. So it doesn't look like they're going to let the handbrake off significantly anytime soon. It's not as though next month or the month after we're all going to be back to normal and trading. So where does this leave the mixed economy? I mean, have we entered a whole new era here of state control that's irreversible, do you think, or can we somehow back out?
I don't think so, and here's why I think that's not right. Is that the elites that put this plan in place assumed perfect compliance. They assumed that everybody would just go, oh, okay. The computer modelers know best. We'll follow the best science and just go along with it. And they would conduct their beautiful social experiment, and it would work perfectly. And then they would have power forever. So that didn't happen. It worked for about a month or two, but then people got restless and cabin fever and began to not believe the experts. And I can tell you, I'm sure you've seen on television the scenes from American cities. Yeah. After 3 months of this egregious nonsense of economic suffering and oppression, people wanted to, and then when they saw George Floyd being having a boot on his neck, just like an Orwell, and then dying, they're like, okay, that's enough. And they went onto the streets absolutely in defiance of stay-home orders, in defiance of lockdowns, in defiance of curfews, and have blown up, utterly destroyed and smashed the plans of the modelers, the elites, the government, and people are really just screaming, I want freedom, even if it's dangerous. I'm going to exercise my liberties, even if, as they tell me, it's a potential risk. I don't want a life where I stay huddled down in my apartment forever in poverty for fear of a virus.
Well, that's really heartening.
That's
really heartening to see that's happening.
No,
in some respects.
Yeah, it's being shredded right now, and I can tell you that like 3 months ago, everybody among the elite class that was like all lockdown. Now you can't find a single American public intellectual who's willing to defend the lockdowns. Not one. They're all in hiding.
But I mean to say it's encouraging that people are not standing for it. I mean, this is good. I mean, I couldn't help but suspect that a lot of events are sort of agitated and fermented into existence. There's obviously that aspect too. But I contrast what's happening in America, as you say there, with what seems to be happening in the UK, and combined with an unprecedented sunny spring. Most people, or a lot of people that I sort of am in touch with, through just my social interactions and so forth, so I'm not speaking for everybody, there's a huge swathe of people that are enjoying a great big sunny holiday on a furlough of 80% of salary in the sunshine. And it doesn't appear that they've suffered enough yet. I mean, either the implications of the long term haven't hit bottom, or the very, the economic consequences for large numbers of people really haven't shown themselves yet. So a lot of people are still on holiday here, and they're nowhere near angry enough to get out and do what we've been seeing on the streets of America. So I mean, I almost wish the British people would get up and.
But the British people are funny, right? They get angry in different ways. And instead of protesting on the streets, they laugh at Neil Ferguson and his paramour, and Boris Johnson's sister, scandalously driving, to her summer home 4 times in violation of curfew, in violation of the lockdown orders, and so on. So, the British people have a different way of being incredulous. Americans are histrionic, and we're wild people, which is the last country in the world. Well, Italy's even worse, but America will never stand for lockdown. I mean, we could do it maybe a couple of weeks, but after that, we're like, you know what? F this stuff. I'm gonna. But I could tell you amazing stories of this. I mean, like, and the masks are coming off, and there's no more social distancing, and people are just out on the streets, and it's like it's kind of an uprising against lockdown, which is great. Well, I mean,
I'm really encouraged by what you're saying. I'm because I've been just being a little bit more depressed about the prospects for the future. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
No, and if you are depressed, you know what, like in an absence of truth, and we really do live in an age of like unbearable lies, from politicians, the media, and everything else. One thing that tells more truth than any other institution in the whole world is the markets.
Well, yeah.
And right now, the financial markets are actually extremely optimistic for the future. And one of the reasons they are is that we're seeing the entire political managerial class discredited, the whole media elite being ridiculed and hated, the bogus scientific establishment that gave us these lockdowns are now in hiding. This is why markets are levitating higher. And that's
what about just to play devil's advocate? I don't mean to stop you in your train, Jeffrey. But what about the Fed buying up assets? I mean, how's that not getting distorting the markets?
It's terrible. I mean, the real effects of this stuff are ghastly, and we're going to be feeling them for 5 years, 10 years.
But are the markets genuinely seeing signs to be positive about, or is it just the Fed buying up assets? I mean, that's what I'm wondering.
No. I don't think it's I don't know. I don't think the prices are up because the Fed is buying up assets. The markets can be fooled by this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's true. But with the Fed buying up in municipal bonds and stocks and everything else, you can't actually buy enough. Not even the Fed can buy enough to cause the prices to lie, because once people suspect that that's the reason for the price increases, they're going to sell because that's unsustainable. The other thing that's really important to remember is that monetary economists in this country are outraged and disgusted at what Jerome Powell is doing, because it violates every precedent. I mean, not even Janet Yellen did this. She said, back in the day when cities were failing, their municipal bonds were being downgraded. She said that's not a rule. If Congress wants to bail out that city, let them do it, but that's not the job of the Fed. And Bernanke, even at the height of the crisis, and he did terrible things, never did this. Jerome Powell is weak, easily politically manipulated, and a little bit unsophisticated about monetary policy and afraid of Trump. And he's out there doing these idiotic things. But it's extremely offensive to everybody who is kind of guardians of old-fashioned monetary policy in this country, and they're complaining about it and screaming about it. And Jerome Powell is very soon, certainly within the next 3 months, certainly 6 months, going to have to unload a lot of these assets that he bought. So he'll be out of this in no time, I think. I mean, they're not going to allow a Weimar situation to happen. I think this is all Jerome Powell's trying to put, a chance for political survival. But I don't think it actually is making that much difference in the markets.
So what about the fact that, according to a poll, and forgive me for not being able to quote it, a bunch of people were asked, what would you do tomorrow if the lockdown was lifted? And this was probably some 5 or 6 weeks ago, just to put it in context. And at least 40% said that they'd stay at home, essentially in fear of the virus. They would carry on locking down and socially isolate. And sure. I think it was as little as 14% said they'd, I'll get up and get on with my life as normal then. So this sort of, as I was mentioning, the broken Ming vase thing, you can't sort of go back and unlearn the fear. How's that going to affect these economic prospects, even if the markets are looking buoyant initially? And again, I come back to this issue of state control. Do you having witnessed this precedent been set, do you think they'll just sort of unlock and put that tool back in the box, as it were, just ready to sort of roll it out whenever it might be convenient in the future?
So I would say about that 14% that's a very hardcore group. I mean, that's a revolutionary group that's like, I don't want to have anything to do with these lockdowns. And also, you pollster who's probably working for the government and is going to report report me, and you've tracked my phone. I'm even going to tell you to go screw yourself. All right, that's a tough hardcore, right? The rest of the people, when pollsters should have learned this by now, but people will say the conventional thing. When the pollster calls, they say what they're supposed to say, and everybody knows what they're supposed to say. So I don't believe these polls. I think they're just silly. That all they do is reflect what the conventional wisdom. And the media always knows when to take these polls. It's like, let's say the same thing on the top headline for 2 weeks, then we'll call people and ask what they think, and they'll say exactly what we said on the headlines. That's the way polls work.
Yeah, that's true.
And in private, people are, and you know this, right? You have friends, you talk, all your friends are like, this is all just pseudoscience. This is a racket. This is a violation of everything we stand for. I mean, this is what people say in private, but in the pollster calls, they go like, oh yeah, no, these lockdowns have been very good. They've really stopped the spread of the disease. I'm really happy to stay home. Oh, a restaurant opens? Never go to that. But as soon as it opens, we've seen this in America. Americans are a little more unruly, I would say, than the typical Britain.
I would agree. I think the British take far too much shit.
Yeah. Americans are just like barreling out into the beaches, and have ignored all this stuff. And now the last 4 days, I mean, it's just been crazy. Like the masks are off and people are socially closening and, in the streets and glad to reclaim their freedoms in defiance. And nothing about the law has changed, by the way, right? We're more or less still in this country under these, a variety of kind of stay home orders and restrictions, and the restrictions are perfectly absurd, right? So there's these states have all sorts of rules. They're like, okay, here's stage 2 of opening, so you can buy perfume, but when you buy it, you can't spray it on yourself because that will give you coronavirus. You can go into a shop to buy clothes as long as you have an appointment, and when you're there, you can't try them on because that'll spread coronavirus, and so on. You can open your daycare, but your kids can't play together.
There's much hilarity over here with people, reeling out the endless contradictions of one rule against another. And as we free marketeers know, one government regulation leads to another one, and particularly if it's based on a false premise or a false assumption baked into your model, it's never going to make sense. But it's interesting because the wonderful thing about the free market and the you can't predict people's behaviour, can you? You just can't quite predict what they're going to take, what they're not going to take, how they're going to react, and certainly over here I see a significant majority that have really bought the scary virus presumption hook, line and sinker, and they're acting on it. They are scared, and there is again, as you pointed out, the hardcore 14%. I don't know what the percentage is around here, but there's a significant percentage that as you say, just won't take it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as time goes on, and the sort of ratchet keeps cranking up the pressure.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a growing incredulity, and it's been very interesting for me, as sitting as the editorial director of the American Institute for Economic Research. We were very early on. Like I wrote on January 27th an article going, government can't do anything to control the virus. They're going to try to, but it's not going to work. And what should government do? Absolutely nothing. So I wrote this article, and it was completely ignored. People were like, "Oh, we'll never get a virus. We're Americans." So when the virus came, it's true that for a while people really did panic, but it was because the media fomented the panic. They really did play a really big role here in getting everybody whipped up into a frenzy. Even from mid February, the New York Times was, and by the way, don't kid yourself. In the U.S., there are only two real newspapers. There's the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The Wall Street Journal has a big subscriber base, but no other media pays any attention to them. The New York Times rules all. Whatever the New York Times says, every other newspaper will say within a week. That's just the way it works. You don't need to read anything else. Everything else is derivative, and that's it. So from mid-February, they were giving these insane warnings from this guy named David McNeil or something like that, who's a rhetoric professor at Berkeley, that we need to pursue a medieval strategy here, and everybody needs to run and hide and drop in place and all this kind of stuff. It was like nuts. I mean, I was sitting there listening to this. I thought, my God, I know the New York Times tends to dominate American press, but is the media really going to go along with this? Well, sure enough, within a week or two, everybody was on board with the New York Times line. But the great thing is that all this ended up in calamity, and now that even the New York Times is discredited. I mean, they were already discredited when Trump got reelected. They were already discredited after the Russian collusion thing, after the impeachment hoax, and so on. And so this is their big third attempt to dislodge the ruts in Trump, and this one has backfired like nothing else. And so now they've surrendered all credibility with anybody. I just don't think there's anything left of it, really. After it's ruined 40 million people out of work, hundreds of thousands of businesses dead. People's liberties and being forced home for 3 months, all because we had to trust some fake medical professionals, computer scientists. This is not going to end well for these people.
So, what about the overall economic outlook, though? A lot of people have been suspecting that this restriction in trade, this deliberate handbrake or controlled demolition, even I've heard some people use that term, of the economy, is going to obviously end, as that term would suggest, in disaster. You don't see that happening, then, do you?
I think we're going to probably be in something like a depression for a number of years. Actually, I mean it's a calamity by any standards, but the free market can be rebuild very, very quickly. And my only analogy that I would draw your attention to is Japan and Germany after World War II. Yeah. Right, their entire establishments were destroyed. The networks that connected the government to the private sector, that legal stability that led to war was shattered and discredited and overthrown, and they had unprecedented amounts of growth. So I think it's possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think it's very possible that the discrediting of the old order, by which I mean that which existed in February, has been so extreme that we really are about to live in a post-war kind of situation, like Germany after the war, Japan after the war, where we have to rebuild, where none of the existing elites have credulity at all. and the free market is just going to come roaring back, and completely ignoring the political class, and over the coming months in the United States, because we have a series of elections coming, right? And then in November, it's going to be really important. There's not going to be a single candidate for office in this country that's going to want to admit that he or she was for lockdowns. Every governor who imposed these school closures and mall closures and shutting down sporting events is going to be destroyed, kicked out of office, and a promise to never lock down again.
Which will easily be broken, but that's good to hear anyway, that at least it's in
it's going to be the dominant political theme in this country. Like, this has been such a trauma for the American people. I don't care what the New York Times pretends as if the corona lockdowns never happened because the most important thing is the race riots on the streets. That's today, right? Not 5 days ago, but that's today. It doesn't matter. I mean, people have been so traumatized by this that there will be no going back. So I actually am very optimistic. Another reason I'm optimistic is that during the lockdowns, in order to keep life functioning, governments have had to repeal something like 600 regulations that have been in place for 20, 30, 50, 70 years just to keep us functioning. So it's the strangest thing to say, but here in the United States, and I can't speak to the UK, we're living through unprecedented deregulation.
Really?
Yeah, we're all under stay-home orders, and our restaurants can't open, and we can't try on clothes and can't spray perfume on ourselves. But for the first time, doctors can practice medicine across borders. I can do telemedicine, and so on. There's other kinds of deregulation that have happened in terms of schooling. Right? It's probably like in the UK. In this country, homeschooling has always existed under a cloud until it suddenly became mandatory.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So things like that are good. I think we could emerge from this thing freer than we were.
Well, that's a wonderful outlook. I'm going to go away and let all that sink in, because it's nice to just tap into that spirit of no. I don't think people are going to take that. And I mean, interesting. I mean, you're sort of familiar with the sort of, or more familiar than I am with the sort of the barometer of academia over there in the States. Do you think that there's a significant degree of obviously, just a quick tangent, obviously when something like this happens, it takes time to sort of think it all through, doesn't it? It takes time for us to gather the information to actually suss out what's going on, which is why the sort of lie's gone around the world twice before the truth's got its boots on, as it were. But do you think, given that we've had 10 weeks or so now, is there sufficient feeling within academia over there in the States at least that will resist all this insanity? I mean, I'm getting the impression that you have, but maybe to sort of summarise for us.
I don't think so. American academia has become 85% corrupt over the last 15 years. I don't know how else I can explain that to you, but it's really bad in this country. Academia, like if you,
I'm utterly unsurprised to hear that. I'm sure it's the same here.
If you have a child who's the age of 17 and looking for a college to go to, it's not an easy choice, because you're most likely going to send them off and they're going to be told all about the microaggressions that are happening to them all the time, and tap into their childish sense and put their heads full of socialism and social justice, voyeurism, and so on, and they'll become snowflakes and utterly unprepared for the real world of work and so on. I mean, this is all the humanities departments and social science departments in the United States colleges and universities are basically thoroughly corrupt, ideologically corrupt. But so I'm not optimistic that they can be reformed at all, but let me just say this. The response to this virus on the part of American colleges and universities, with very few exceptions, has been egregious and terrible, and they've shut down their campuses and forced their students to stay home and watch professors on video. This is going to be devastating. So we could see a failure of American academia here, like a business failure, that we could see hundreds and thousands of universities and colleges closing within the next year. And I don't want to say to you, that's good, but I kind of want to say to you that's good.
Yeah, well, if they're not working, they're not churning out thinking, critical, functioning members of society, then best that they do get closed, I suppose. Just one other theme, Jeffrey. the cryptocurrencies, they haven't reacted perhaps quite as some people might have liked, thus far at least. But we're recording this on June 3rd, so very recently Bitcoin, I think, pushed just through the $10,000 barrier. Do you think that this could be a scenario that could bring the cryptocurrencies more into use, particularly in the context of this sort of phobia about cash? I don't know how much is happening in the States, but certainly here, many shops won't take cash now. Obviously, you could catch the virus from touching your cash. So it doesn't look very far away that some kind of cashless society is going to seem the obvious knock-on, inevitable next good idea. So where do you think all of this might leave, either Bitcoin specifically or the cryptocurrencies in general?
Well, Bitcoin still has a terrible scaling problem. Like, the more people use it, the more expensive it is to use, and it's not even as good as credit cards or ACH at this point, and which is truly tragic. Although there are other forms of tokens and cryptocurrency that aren't as networked, that work better than BTC, so-called. But I think the important thing to observe about BTC and every other crypto is that during the lockdowns, they never locked down. I mean, that's extremely significant. Like, let's say a government said, "Oh, Bitcoin has to lock down." Who are you going to lock down? Who are you going to tell to shut down? And you can shut down the exchanges. That doesn't take away Bitcoin. You can tell people, "Oh, stop buying Bitcoin." That's not going to stop anything. So I think the fact that it continued to function as normal and proved itself impervious to the entire lockdown culture of the world is extremely significant. And I think what you need to look at right now are the things that worked during the lockdown. And that was cryptocurrency. Absolutely. So, the fact that it didn't go up, I mean, I bought Bitcoin when it was $30, so I'm not unimpressed by $6,000, or $9,000. I assume it's going to stay around $10,000 up plus or minus a couple $1,000s for a few years. But that's okay. It's okay. I do think it's going to be our future.
Excellent. Well, is there anything, I'm aware of the time now, Jeffrey, is there anything you wanted to say, in conclusion, or anything about any more of your work, or where people might be able to hear more about your message?
Sure. We're cranking out material, including very deep research on the history and meaning of what happened to us. I think people need to understand it and worth reading. In fact, we just put out a special report on this yesterday, which you can get at AIER.org. American Institute for Economic Research, and download it, have a look at it. I put it out because I thought it was really important that people calm down, understand what's happened to us, and get optimistic for the future. Because the world that's around us right now is made of bad ideas from the past, mostly hatched 14 years ago. But the world of the future is made from the things we believe today. So it becomes extremely important for everyone to educate themselves, to get optimistic, start believing in human rights and human freedom as a hardcore principle, inalienable rights. And let's rebuild. Let's rebuild the world we just left. It could be a brief moment in history. Let's go forward.
Wonderful. Jeffrey Tucker, thank you so much for taking the time to share your perspective. I'm certainly buoyed up, shall we say. It's always good to get different perspectives, and yours has certainly seemed more optimistic than most at the moment. So thank you so much for that. Thank you everybody for listening, and do visit the website lawfulrebel.com for a whole lot more information there, and join us again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.